In this series of candidate interviews, one-on-one, we've been talking to the major statewide candidates, and our purpose here is to simply get to know them a little bit better, and perhaps you'll hear some things that you might not hear on the campaign trail. And our guest today, Forrest Dunbar, who is running for U.S. Congress, U.S. House against a longtime incumbent, yes, Don Young. And, you know, you've had some pretty creative campaign strategies, the Run, Forrest, Run. I heard one of your ads, and it's even got your mother going, yes, Run, Forrest, Run.
Yeah, and that's my actual mother, too. That's not a voice actor. We had her talking to someone. My family doesn't own a cell phone back in Cordova, or at least not a smartphone. And so, but one of their friends had a smartphone, so she said, "Run, Forrest, Run" into that, and they emailed it to us, and we put it into the ad. So that was great.
So, now, who came up with that concept?
The Run, Forrest, Run. You know, there were several people who we talked to about it very early on in the campaign. I can say that ad in particular, my friend Ethan Berkowitz suggested that we keep running with it. Yeah.
Ran against Don Young.
Yes. Ethan.
In a campaign that was extremely well financed.
Yes.
And I think people concluded that if Ethan, with a campaign like that, couldn't come near striking distance of Don Young, sure, that we might as well forget it, that Don Young is congressman for all Alaskan and will never be beaten.
Well, you know, I think Ethan did come within striking distance. He certainly was defeated, but he came closer than anyone had since the early 90s when John Devens got very close twice.
He was the mayor of Valdez.
Exactly. And you know, I think the reason that this cycle is different is because people are starting to realize that when Ethan ran against Don in 2008, we weren't totally sure how Don Young's ethics violations would play out and whether he'd be able to recover from them and start chairing committees again and be powerful again. And so he could still credibly make the argument that, you know, I'm very powerful for the state. I do a lot of things for the state. And what we've realized over the last 6 years is that his power has gone and is not coming back.
Well, he says a lot of his power is behind the scenes in things that he does for individual Alaskans, that he wields a lot of clout.
He certainly does some. There's no question that every Alaskan in statewide office in our federal delegation works very hard to have good constituent relations and solve specific constituent issues. And that's something that my office would be very much focused on as well.
Well, you said that you have a friendship with Ethan Berkowitz.
Yes.
And what kind of advice is he giving you in this race? Since he's been through it before.
It's always been pretty informal. I've known him since I volunteered on his campaigns in 2008, 2010. I've spoken with a number of people. I speak with Harry Crawford as well about his run.
Former Representative Harry Crawford.
Former state House rep and current candidate for state Senate, and who also ran against Don. And I speak with many people. And usually it's in an informal capacity. In fact, it always is.
Well, you know, one thing that tends to bug people about candidates like yourself is that they run for state office, statewide office, with no previous experience, you know, serving on a school board, sure, an assembly.
Or working in Congress. You know, most people who run for these offices haven't worked on the Hill before. I was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to intern and then be a paid staffer on the Hill. So I have more.
Who did you work for?
I worked for Frank Murkowski as just an intern, 17. And then when I was in college, I worked for a Democratic Congresswoman named Madeline Bordalio, first as an intern, then as a paid staffer, paid part-time staffer. So I have, I know what you're saying in terms of, you know, the school board or state house. But I do have more federal experience now than Don Young did when he ran for this office back in the 70s.
So since you've, you know, had some experience on the Hill, so to speak. I mean, where did the spark come when you made the decision that, hey, I'm going to give this a try? Was it working for Ethan Berkowitz, or?
You know, certainly having that campaign experience, and I've also done a little work in Juneau, and working with people gave me the confidence that I could do the job well. But for me, it was a combination of having a rural Alaskan background and having those values, and then closely following federal policy and federal, what's happening right now in D.C., and just realizing that Congress is dysfunctional And I talk to Alaskans all the time who say that Congress is fundamentally broken right now. And I believe that I could get in there and do good work on behalf of the state. And we as Alaskans need more ethical and effective representation. So I saw the lay of the land in D.C. and knew that Alaska could do better and needed to do better.
So let's talk about your background growing up in rural Alaska.
Yeah.
What did you learn from that experience?
I learned a whole lot. So until I was 7, I lived in Eagle, which is a little town on the Yukon, you know, and it gets down to 60 below there. And I had just a little house my grandpa and my dad built, and had an outhouse and all that. I guess one of the things I learned is if you stay in an outhouse long enough, it'll warm up. Your body heat will warm up the outhouse even when it's 20 or 30 below. And those halogen lights help as well, or those big lights help as well. I guess they're floodlights. But anyway, and then we moved to Cordova. And in 1991, my family moved to Cordova. And my dad is a fisheries biologist, or just recently retired from Fish and Game. And so we moved there after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. They were bringing in a lot of different people to help study the effects. And he eventually ended up running the sonar camp at Miles Lake, which measures the escapement of the salmon. And so, you know, I had a fairly typical childhood, except it was off the road system. And I went to Cordova Junior Senior High School and graduated from there. And my parents still live there. After I finished high school, they moved to Fairbanks, and for about 10 years. And I spent a couple summers in Fairbanks. I was a firefighter. I was a wildland firefighter, and I stocked shelves at Fred Meyer. You know, it's just kind of the things that young people do in Alaska.
And so how did you get on the track to be an attorney?
You know, for a long time I didn't want to be, and some of my friends were going to law school, and I didn't want to do that. And so when I left college, I took the GRE as opposed to the LSAT, the GRE to get you into grad school. And I applied to and was accepted to the Kennedy School, where I was doing a program for public policy. I have a master's in public policy. But shortly before I was set to start at that school, I realized they had a joint degree program with a number of different law schools. And so I had the option to get a law degree faster than you typically would. And it just seemed like a great opportunity. And plus I knew I wanted to come back to Alaska. And I thought maybe there were relatively few jobs for someone who just had a master's degree. Maybe I needed a terminal professional degree so that I could put food on the table, although I knew I wanted to work in public policy. And so that's sort of the route I took.
And so here you are running for office. You know, we know so little about you because you haven't run for other office, run for the legislature. You know, it's kind of typical for people to have served in some capacity, you know, run as mayor or as a legislator. But what I wanted to ask you about a little bit is you know, going back to your growing up and you're fairly young, so it's hard to say, you know.
Although older than I look, as you pointed out earlier.
Well, you're 30, right?
I am, yeah.
And you get carded still, I imagine.
Yeah. Hopefully everybody gets carded. That's the, you know.
But anyway, you've had a young life. But have you had any challenge that sort of defined you? Some difficulty, personal difficulty that you ran up against, and if you did, how did you work your way through it?
That's a great question. I absolutely have had. You know, I tell kids I've done a lot of work tutoring. When I was in New Haven, I tutored in a school. I taught constitutional law at a high school. When I was in Boston, I actually went to a place called West Roxbury and did some SAT prep for kids that ordinarily wouldn't get it. And sometimes when I speak with those students and others too, I would tell them, you know, you look at my life and maybe it does look like I've been successful. But the truth is, for every success I've had 2 or 3 or 4 failures. For every scholarship I've won, there have been 2 or 3 I've lost. For every school I got into, there were other ones that rejected me. And so the key is to not be afraid of failure. When I'm speaking with those students, that's always what I tell them. You know, put yourself out there, and you're not going to get certain jobs. You're not going to get into certain schools, but that's okay. You know, you will find yourself in a place where you belong. And if you work hard and you have faith, but especially if you work hard, things will turn out okay. But thinking about a specific challenge that I faced, so I serve in the Alaska Army National Guard, and I've been in it for about a year now, a little more than a year. But I was applying for almost 2 years before that, and I had to get a health waiver. It took a long time to get in because I had to get a health waiver. And the reason I had to get a health waiver is, despite the fact that I'm physically fit and a non-smoker and all that, I was pretty badly injured in the Peace Corps. 2 separate injuries. I punctured the cartilage in my ankle and a herniated disc in my lower back that went untreated. I was hobbling around for a good portion of my 20s, had to get a number of surgeries on my ankle, re-injured it. And maybe this is a little more detail than you wanted, but the injury to my ankle, which was a sports injury, they put me in a walking boot. It caused a blood clot in my leg. And so I had to be
it's like a cascade.
Yeah, exactly. And so
I
was put on the drug thinner Coumadin, which I think a lot of people especially people who are elderly, are familiar with. So when I left law school, I lost my student health insurance. And like many people in my generation, I didn't have access to employer health insurance when I got out. My employer, for a variety of reasons, didn't offer health insurance. So I went into the private market. This is all before the Affordable Care Act. Went into the private market and was told by every company, and I called the hotline, you are uninsurable. You cannot get health insurance. You were on the blood thinner Coumadin for 5 years. You will not get health insurance. And it was one of the most stressful periods of my life. I didn't have health insurance. I was worried that I would get hurt, and I didn't know what to do. And now I look at the system we have. It's not perfect, but if I didn't get my health care through the military, I would get it through the exchanges. And so that has really informed a lot of my thinking on health care.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, Obamacare. There's a steady drumbeat from the Republican Party about, how it needs to be scrapped.
Yeah, they say repeal the whole thing. That's their line. Repeal the whole thing. Dan Sullivan says that, and not Mayor Dan, but Senate Dan Sullivan says that, and so does my opponent Don Young.
So, what's your take on that, given what you've been through?
Well, if it's hard for me at the time I was 27. If it was hard for me as a 27-year-old with no other serious medical conditions besides my sports injuries and the blood clot, if it was hard for me, again, non-smoker, all the rest, to get health insurance, how hard is it for somebody in their 50s or someone in their 40s who has had cancer, for example, or some other serious issue? They're not going to be able to get health insurance. Before the Affordable Care Act, they have a pre-existing condition. They would be discriminated against by health insurers. So the solution is, well, maybe they can get Medicaid. Well, Medicaid is for if you are in poverty. And it's true, the #1 cause of bankruptcies in America is personal medical bills. Medical bankruptcy was the #1 cause of personal bankruptcy in this country.
Oh, it can be overwhelming when you get your bills lined up. But so obviously, it sounds like you support Obamacare, but what would you tweak it?
Yeah,
how?
There are clearly reforms that could be made, and I have people talk to me all the time about it. It's a very complicated bill, and that's part of the critique of it. It was too large, too complicated. But the heart of the bill was really 2 things. One, it was the Medicaid expansion, which allowed tens of thousands, millions of people across the country to get health insurance, and had our governor accepted it, it would have given between 10 and 40,000 Alaskans, depending which study you believe, health insurance. And the second big part of the Affordable Care Act was preventing health insurance companies from discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. And so when I point that out and I say whatever reforms we do have to preserve that heart, the protection for people with pre-existing conditions, my Republican opponents, or just people who are opposed to general, say, oh, no, well, no, of course, we'll keep that portion, but we need to repeal the rest. But that's the heart of the bill. They're agreeing with the heart of the bill. If they think that we need to protect people with pre-existing conditions, then they agree with the Affordable Care Act.
Well, the mantra of the Republican Party and all of the ads that are run on the Republican side to support Republican candidates all bash President Obama. Begich is getting beaten up for voting on Obama's bills.
Well, I would like to ask them, what is their solution? What is their alternative?
I do want to ask you about your thoughts on the military and the way that Obama has managed it as commander-in-chief, because you are in the Alaska National Guard.
I am, and
you could potentially be deployed.
Absolutely, and I knew that when I signed up. And anyone who joins the reserves of the Guard since the early part of the Bush administration knows that deploying is a real possibility. The reserve components are not used today as they were 40 or 50 years ago, where it was a place maybe you could sort of avoid getting deployed or avoid the draft by getting in the Guard or the reserves. That's not how it works anymore.
So what do you think about what he's done? Your opponent says, it's been disastrous.
Well, I mean, I think I'd ask him to be a little more specific. What exactly is he talking about? So Don Young voted for Obama's most recent plan to arm the Syrian rebels. That's somewhere that myself and Mark Begas disagree with Obama and disagree with Don Young. Don Young agreed with Obama to arm the Syrian rebels. I'm worried that those weapons will come back.
Well, as someone
to bite
in the
us.
military affected by
Yeah.
Obama's decisions,
Yeah.
how would you rate him?
You know, I'd say needs improvement, certainly. And there are places where he has fallen short. But I will say that Senator Begich and the administration has tried to work hard to, no, let me clarify that. The administration has failed when it comes to the Veterans Administration in the lower 48. There's no question. But that failure wasn't new. For anyone that was paying attention to those issues go back decades. It's not unique to this administration, but they didn't fix it. But here in Alaska, we've made some fairly tremendous progress. There's more work to be done, but there's progress that has been made to deliver health care to rural communities. Now there are about 27 hospitals that have agreements with the Veterans Administration to be quickly reimbursed so that a veteran can go into a hospital in Nome, in Barrow, in Sitka, and not have to worry about flying to Anchorage to get the care they need. And that's really important that we are delivering healthcare services to our veterans and to everyone in rural areas.
Since you bring up the Alaska National Guard,
Sure.
I'm sure that a lot of people are asking you about the current scandal involving the Guard. What's your take on that?
Well, you know, I serve in the JAG office, which means I'm an attorney, and I'm going to be involved, I'm sure, in some of these cases. So I can't talk about the specifics of it. I will say only that it's very clear, and it's out in the press, that some truly terrible things were done. Most of them hopefully ended a few years ago. Some of them didn't. And we have to be always vigilant, and we have to have someone at the top that's always very concerned about what's happening when it comes to these issues. And you know, it's a problem not just in the Army National Guard, but in the military more generally. And the military has done a tremendous amount of work trying to resolve things, things like sharp training, trying to resolve issues of sexual harassment and sexual assault. And then I'll also say, going even broader, you've got a very specific and very acute problem in the Alaska Army National Guard. You have another broader problem in the U.S. military, and then you have the broadest of all, which is in American society. We have yet, and in Alaska in particular, we have yet to truly deal with our demons when it comes to sexual assault, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to sexual harassment. It's something that we need to continue to do work on. I think there's been progress that has been made, but there is much more work to be done.
You know, one of the big issues that you've raised is some of the inappropriate remarks and behaviors of Don Young.
Well, you know, we've raised it to a certain degree, but I will say it's been raised a little more spontaneously by the press and by other people because some of his behavior has been a little bit bizarre. Well,
so what about his behavior in Wasilla when he was talking before some high school students?
You know, I think he regrets what he said. I would expect that he does. I think that if he was given an opportunity to speak a little more at length, perhaps in a different sort of different setting, maybe he would say it a different way. And I try to think the best of everyone all the time. It's just unfortunate that he said what he said in front of those students, and he said it in such a way. And then it got very heated, and he said perhaps he swore at them or whatever.
He made some off-color remarks.
Yeah.
One about bulls having sex to talk about gay marriage.
Right. That was also unfortunate. You know, I saw someone say recently that the toughest job in politics is flacking for Don Young, being the press secretary for Don Young. I think that probably is a very tough job.
But did that hit home for you?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in rural Alaska, like we talked about, and like everybody in rural Alaska, suicide it's ever present. You know, it's something you encounter. I've had 3 friends, 3 people I know pretty well, kill themselves, and it's something that certainly strikes home for me. And 2 of those were here in Alaska. One was actually a friend that I made later on the East Coast. It's something that can harm anyone, any family. It's clearly a mental health issue. And here in Alaska, it's a mental health crisis. We have
So what did his remark demonstrate to you?
You know, I know we put out a press release right after, and I had said that it demonstrated ignorance on the issue. I suspect that he will come out and say more about it and probably demonstrate that his ignorance isn't, that those remarks don't demonstrate his true thoughts.
They're out of context.
I hope so. I hope so. I do hope that he has the opportunity to sort of redeem himself in that way, because suicide is an issue that should be sort of beyond politics here in the state.
I guess what I was referring to, obviously,
Yeah.
suicide is the source of the controversy,
Sure.
but that also you have a sister who's a lesbian, so I wonder
Right,
if
so
you
there, right,
took
so there,
offense to that.
Yeah, so there are other issues too. If we can take, a lot of things were said at that assembly in Wasilla. At least that seems to be the case from the report. So we'll set suicide to the side, right? Because that's a separate issue that is kind of its own thing that we as Alaskans are always dealing with. And we'll talk about some of the other policies and the other the things that he talked about. So LGBT rights is something that does matter to me and to a lot of young Alaskans, but it is in my family as well. I mean, it matters in particular to my family as well because my sister lives in Portland with her wife. And I went to her wedding, and it bothers me, or it used to bother me, that I lived in a state where her marriage wasn't recognized, despite the fact that she was born in Fairbanks, and this is her home too. But now it appears that that has sort of been resolved in the federal courts, or it looks like it's about to be resolved, where we will have marriage equality here in the state, and I think people will quickly realize that it doesn't mean the sky is going to fall. It means, and I know some people are uncomfortable with it, but I think they'll start to realize that there aren't really any harms to anyone else. What you're doing is allowing two people who have usually been in a long-term committed relationship to love each other and to have the legal rights to go with marriage. And then for the rest of us, you know, my parents haven't reported any harm to their marriage yet.
So,
you know,
how do you
I think
someone with your outlook will fare in a Congress that is quite divided, polarized on this issue?
It is for now, but I think it's going to be resolved pretty quickly, and we're seeing it already change. I think a majority of Americans already do support marriage equality. And here in Alaska, we're a pretty libertarian state in a lot of things. In general, we don't want the government to tell us what we can and can't do. My rabbi would have, because we've spoken before, I'm Jewish, my rabbi would have married a same-sex couple. It was the government that was preventing him from doing so. And some of us said we should get government out of marriage altogether. You know, I have no particular qualms with that, so long as the government doesn't prevent people who want to allow same-sex couples to marry in their church or their synagogue or whatever it is to do so. You know, you said that Congress is divided. I think on this issue it's going to be less divided, and it's going to very quickly change.
Well, I want to go back to Don Young and some of what people claim, especially Democrats, that his behavior is inappropriate.
Sure.
You personally experienced an incident at the fisheries debate in Kodiak. What happened?
You know, what was reported was basically what happened. There were some other heated words exchanged. It's all kind of a blur, but what stood out was what was reported. So what we've said, you know, his ethics violations that happened in 2008 and then again this past summer, and his sort of strange behavior, you know, twisting the arm of a junior staffer, those kind of things.
But what happened? Recount for those of us who didn't read the paper.
Okay.
Tell us in your own words.
He basically said, "You're not." What he said was, "You're not from Cordova any more than I'm from Fort Yukon. I had you looked into," which is a very strange thing to say because there's a mountain of photographic evidence of me living in Cordova as a kid, you know, and going and graduating from Cordova High School. And so I kind of went up to him and I touched him on the arm and said, "What are you talking about?" And then he kind of blew up and he said, "Don't ever touch me. You know, the last person that touched me ended up on the ground dead." That was the sort of quote that sort of jumped out at people because it's so outlandish. And if I was his defense attorney, I would say, this is a false confession. He's suffering from delusion, and I would win that case. He would not get prosecuted because he actually didn't kill anyone. But the problem is, he didn't.
But maybe he was just Don being Don, rough around the edges.
Sure, I mean.
And he said he's been rough around the edges for years, and Alaskans like him for being, in his words, sort of authentic.
Right. I think what he said in Wasilla, for example, that wasn't what we sort of signed up for. You can be authentic and you can be genuine without being rude to your constituents and without being counterproductive. And this is the real key. So regardless of how you feel about it morally in terms of his ethics violations or how you feel about the bizarre behavior, The truth is, he has lost his power. He is no longer influential, and these kind of things are now counterproductive. So there was a time when he could berate someone on TV, and they knew he was the chair of the Transportation Committee. He was the chair of the Natural Resources Committee. He was very powerful. And so you would take that, and then you would do what he perhaps wanted you to do. But now, he doesn't chair any committees. He doesn't serve in any leadership capacity in his party. People that are being berated know that he is speaking loudly and carrying a small stick. And so it's counterproductive for the state. That's not how you get things done, because they are going to be less likely to do what we as Alaskans want them and need them to do. Things like building the road to King Cove.
Well, being a young person,
Sure.
30 years old, running for Congress against someone who calls himself Congressman for all Alaska, and reelected so many times.
Yeah.
I mean, it is almost like a David versus Goliath campaign.
Sure. At the campaign level, yes, in terms of how much money we have raised. We have raised quite a bit from individual Alaskans, and it has allowed us to go onto the radio and allowed us to do digital advertising. But we don't have sort of the piles of corporate donor cash, the lobbyist cash that he gets, because he's an incumbent and because he lives and works in DC so much. So he's going to outraise us, I think, probably 3 or 4 to 1. So in that respect, yes, absolutely. But in terms of our fluency on the issues, in terms of our actual relative power, I mean, he passed roughly the same number of bills last term as he did his freshman term. If I'm coming in as a freshman, I'm not going to be significantly less influential than he is today.
But you would potentially and most likely be going into a Republican
Sure. And I would think
dominated House.
And I think Lisa would make the argument that despite the fact she's been in the minority for the last 8 years, she has still been an effective senator. And she's done so by being bipartisan, by being open to new ideas, by working on both sides of the aisle, by being respectful of people, and by persuading them with reasoning and logic and facts. And in Alaska's case, often the science and the facts are on our side. And so we have to present them in a good way. And most Alaskan issues are not Democrat or Republican issues. They're Alaskan issues. The road to King Cove being a good example. But there are issues. A bill that Don Young passed, that I very much respect, allows certain Tlingit groups to harvest gull eggs on certain federal lands. That was one of the bills he passed this past year. Great bill. I totally support it. But it's not a Democrat or Republican issue. And when you're going through the Republican-controlled House, I don't think they're going to. So I'll give you another example. All of the bills that Don Young passed this year, Nancy Pelosi voted for. He likes to bash on Nancy Pelosi, but every bill he was able to pass, Nancy Pelosi voted for.
I think as consumers of politics, we get weary of all this kind of nitpicking.
Sure.
But so in wrapping things up here,
Sure.
I want to ask you. He's been dubbed himself Congressman for all Alaska. So
Sure.
if you were elected, how would you like to be known?
People can call me Forrest, but it is true that we have one seat. It's an at-large seat. So I don't take issue with him saying Congressman for all Alaska. Whoever is the congressperson will be the congressperson for all Alaska and all Alaskans. Regardless of whether someone votes for you or doesn't vote for you, it's your duty to represent that person. So I know there's going to be a lot of people that don't vote for me.
You don't have a nickname you'd like to be known by other than just Forrest?
I think they say you shouldn't give yourself a nickname. So far, I haven't done that. And we'll see if one develops, right? Hopefully it'll develop organically.
All right, last question.
Yeah.
Not everybody can win, no matter how hard they try, no
Sure.
matter how much blood, sweat, and tears goes into it.
Yeah.
The odds are that, you may be like the rest of the people that have tried to defeat Don Young. So
Sure.
where do you go from there if you lose?
I really haven't thought about it. I have no plans after November 4th. I am committed to this race. I'm committed to working for Alaskans. I think our odds have dramatically improved in the last couple of weeks, going back to the Kodiak debate. We've proven that we're a substantive campaign and that we want to get out there and get to know people and hear their issues. And because of that, we're much more likely to get elected. And I'm more likely to get elected. And of course, Don Young's sort of strange behavior.
Well, you said earlier
well.
in our interview that
Yeah.
you have counseled students that if first you don't succeed, try again. So
Yeah.
are we going to see another candidacy perhaps? Or?
It's certainly possible. Hopefully in 2016, I'll be running for re-election.
Well, you know, in a way, in some sense, with our political system, with campaigns, that there really are no losers as we learn from candidates. You know, if the other person on the other side that loses presses ideas. So, what do you think? Do you think your campaign, if you lose, would have some contribution?
I do. You know, I think what we have done. There's a few things, but one of the big things is reaching out to young people and demonstrating to young people, I hope, that they can be involved, that their voices matter, that their ideas matter, that it's important that they step up and take a leadership role. And it's not about us against them. It's not about the young people against the older people. It's about young people coming to the table and being heard as well, and participating and voting and getting out and volunteering and doing those kind of things. And our campaign has been centered around that, and I wrote a piece on that as well. That is something I hope will have a lasting impact here in Alaska. We want more young people and the young generation to be more involved in leading our state, because we know if we want our children and our grandchildren to live here, we have to be diversifying our economy. We have to be looking for sustainable jobs. We have to be looking to the future, and that means young people have to get involved as well.
All right, well, we're out of time, but I want to thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Forrest Dunbar, a candidate for Congress on the Democratic ticket.